Welcome back to Being the Head, the human cost of leading schools. I'm Jacqui, a lifelong head, now working with leaders across the UK to stay strong in the job and in themselves.
And I'm Jane. Together, we bring you honest conversations about school leadership, the good, the bad, and the bits that keep you awake in the middle of the night.
And I'm Trevor. I'm quite a lengthy experience as a successful head teacher, I hope, and inspecting for Ofsted, and most recently in advice and support for schools all over the country.
Today, we're unpacking the brand new Ofsted framework published this week, and we're joined by our guest, Trevor Davies, an experienced head teacher, Ofsted inspector, and educational consultant. Trevor is going to share how schools can prepare for inspections under the new system. Welcome, Trevor, to Being the Head.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Okay, headlines from the head. So, the headline today, as we all know, is Ofsted Shake-up. And from November 25, schools will no longer receive a single overall effectiveness grade. Instead, inspections will produce a report card across key areas, which are curriculum, safeguarding, leadership and governance, inclusion, achievement, behaviour, and personal development. And I think it's only for schools that are volunteered for inspections will be inspected from November. Anybody else, we've got until the 1st of December. Lucky us.
Just before Christmas. And safeguarding is now a pass or fail, met or not met. The grades across the board run from exceptional, strong standard, expected standard, and needs attention to urgent improvement. This aims to give parents and governors a more rounded picture, but it also means schools could face much more detailed scrutiny. Trevor, let's start with the elephant in the room. Leaders are worried. They're asking, what on earth do I need to do differently now? Can you walk us through the structural changes schools should be most aware of?
Well, hopefully, Jacqui, most of you out there will have had a chance to look at the consultative document that came out earlier in the year. And the final Ofsted framework, which came out, as you rightly said, earlier this week, has not changed significantly from that. As you say, one or two of the headings have changed. We've now got exceptional instead of exemplary. And I think attention needed is a little softer than needs attention or requires improvement, which was previously the case. So the labels are quite clear. The framework's out there. I've been going through it, looking at the structure of it, and it's very evident that inclusion runs through the framework like print through Brighton Rock. If you get your inclusion right, you're a long way towards having a successful inspection. But inclusion is such an important part of the school culture, you have to get it right. And that in itself is linked to safeguarding. And the big focus of the strapline, I think, that comes through the whole framework is that we should be prioritizing keeping up, not catching up. And particularly with the inclusion focus in mind for those vulnerable groups, pupil premium, disadvantaged, SEND, those children who are socially disadvantaged and those who've got protected characteristics. And it's absolutely key that those children are fully supported and their achievement and progress promoted in every aspect of school life. And not neglecting, of course, the other end of the spectrum, which are children who need more challenge, the more able. But I think it's a good structure. I like it. As I say, there are 8 areas, 7 that are graded, and 1 that is safeguarding, which is either met or not met. And I think that if schools use the framework effectively, it's a wonderful toolkit that's provided to support them in meeting all the requirements for each of the areas.
Thank you, Trevor. Alongside that, what do you think your number one practical preparation tip would you give head teachers and senior leaders? So I know you're brilliant at those because I know you helped me when you supported me when I was a substantive head. So what's your number one practical preparation tip?
Well, I've been saying since May to head teachers, get to know the framework. familiarise yourself with the framework. I would suggest that you have a training day purely allocated to the framework with your staff, because the staff need to have familiarity with it as well. It's very clearly prescribed. It's very evident what you need to do to meet the secure expected standard or the strong standard. And most schools will be operating within the zone of needs attention, expected standard or strong standard. But to go back to Jane's question a few minutes ago, I think familiarity with the framework is key. And if I was ahead, I'd be having a training day where I'd allocate aspects of the framework to the staff. But as a collaborative task, get them to highlight where inclusion falls in each of the 7 areas, or 8 areas, 7 areas apart from inclusion. And they'll find that it's there, as I said, intrinsic to everyone.
Do you remember you did that wonderful exercise with our heads briefing? Can you remember that? Would you like to talk us through that one? Because that was a really good exercise and our heads got a lot out of that, where you gave us a current Ofsted grading, didn't you? And said,
That's right.
Where did they think it was?
I used an anonymised inspection report for one of my London schools and got them to try and use the new framework to make the judgments against the 8 areas. And they made a pretty good shot of it, didn't they, I think, Jacqui?
They did. Yeah,
Yeah.
it did create that wonderful networking and discussion around the differences between the old and the new, didn't it?
Yeah, and let me give you an example of that thread of inclusion. I was in a school recently, just before the summer holidays, where they were sitting quite comfortably on an attendance figure of 96%. Attendance now is really strong within the new framework. In fact, in the consultative document, it sat alone, but it's now been integrated back into behaviour again. And I said, well, let's look at your pupil premium attendance. And actually, it wasn't good. And so although they were at 96%, they were lower than expected on their pupil premium, disadvantaged and SEND attendance. So it's one thing to sit smugly on 96%, but once again, that inclusion message is there. It's all very well for the large majority of your children to be attending and attending well, but most importantly, are your disadvantaged children, those socially deprived children, attending as regularly as they should? And what are you doing to promote that good attendance?
Yeah, I think that's really key, Trevor. I know in schools that I've supported in before the summer was letting them, those head teachers could clearly articulate the attendances, each of the different subgroups, where the persistent absence was, and actually had case studies saying how they'd supported those particular children. And that's what pushed it forward, even those that were below the national overall, because they were able to articulate and evidence how they were driving it forward. That was fine. They accepted that.
So these are the key messages, Jacqui, really. Familiarise yourself with the framework, as we did at our briefings. Get the staff to fully understand the detail beneath each of those aspects of the framework. Look at what makes secure and actually say, to what extent does our school match those criteria? And I wouldn't settle for best fit. You need to make certain you're pretty secure in the expected standard. And then if you are, look at if you meet any of the criteria for the strong standard before making your judgments. But you need to evidence it. And I'll give you a good example of a school I was in actually yesterday in Warwickshire, in Rugby, where the leadership team seemed quite confident on their inclusion. And we went through the inclusion criteria. But when we talked about the pupil premium strategy, it became very aware, and they were aware, that their staff weren't engaged with it. It was all right, very well, putting it on the site, but the staff didn't know how the pupil premium strategy operated as far as they were concerned as teachers in the classroom. So it's about, if you've got documentation that you just put on site, make certain on your website, make certain that actually your staff are working to that. So going back to the original question from Jane, safeguarding, that's an absolute essential, that you're meeting all the keeping children safe in education guidance and the safer recruitment and the child-on-child violence protection and child protection generally. And that just comes from rank good training, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that's important, and all staff are absolutely being involved in an open culture for safeguarding.
And also
Thank
benchmarking it, I think, is really important.
Yeah.
Getting externals to have a look at that, even if it's within your trust. Jane, what would you do for benchmarking your safeguarding?
We used to have an annual external person come in and do an audit, a thorough audit of safeguarding, which
Mm.
created an action plan. Alongside that was the Section 175. But it was actually, we had reflective supervision where our DSLs came together. We all had the same electronic platform. And as trust safeguarding lead, I was able to sort of extrapolate everybody's data and see where there were key gaps in knowledge and understanding. And so once a half term, the external consultant would also provide training to all DSLs, and that was open to governors and directors. And it was based on the gaps that we'd found, and it was ensuring that you followed your local authority policy, because we were across two local authorities. But it's actually that making sure that everybody thoroughly understands that responsibility. The responsibility for safeguarding is everybody's responsibility, and always have it in your head, it could happen here.
Going back to the whole subject of the framework itself, I think if heads familiarise themselves with the framework, and you've got pretty well a term to do it before we see any sign of inspection, really, I don't think you'll be unlucky if you're inspected before Christmas. And I think if you're working to that framework and building up your evidence base against that framework, then I think you'll be in a pretty strong position. Going through the wording, it's very evident that the schools that fall into the attention needed section will often be those where leaders have just come into post and they haven't substantiated work that would take them to that more secure expected standard. Or, effectively, I have to say, it's where leaders haven't been doing their job. And this framework, more than any of the others, and I've seen 5 or 6 frameworks in my time, very clearly identifies what leaders and teachers and governors and all members of the school community should be doing in participating towards those criteria.
Great advice, Trevor. Thank you for that. Really
I've got
good
a bit
advice.
more.
Yeah,
I've got a bit more.
Okay.
I know you have. I know. Hold it. We're going to If I Only Knew. So, Trevor, looking back at the inspections you've supported, what's the one if I only knew moment for schools, or something that they realised too late but could have easily addressed in advance? What would you think that would be?
Well, I think despite the fact that we've been messaging about disadvantaged pupils and pupil premium send for many years now, I still don't feel that many schools have really addressed the issue of what we would have called catch-up, which now needs to be keep-up, really, to support pupils. And I get frustrated time and time again when I go into schools and I see children going into Key Stage 2, not Key Stage 2 ready. And that is a pivotal time in the primary school for me. You have to have those foundational skills. And I'd be saying to any leader, whatever you do, invest in early years, invest in quality teaching within EYFS and Key Stage 1. Children have to have that foundational knowledge. It comes through in the framework. They continually refer to foundational skills, foundational knowledge. And that's so important that when they leave Key Stage 1, they've got those essential literacy skills, communication skills. They've got their phonics and early reading skills, and they can read fluently at the level they should be at year 3. And he'd say to me, well, what should they be writing then? I said, well, first of all, you should make certain that you've got all those skills in place as they build through reception. So they are actually writing at their level and at the right pace. And where children are disadvantaged and haven't got that level of oral development and communication, lots of storytelling in reception to support their language development. But when I go into year 1 and I see children being asked to write about the life story of Florence Nightingale when they can't even put a sentence together, it worries me. So it's really important to get those foundational skills in place. And that really brings me to the point I was going to make earlier, Strong Foundations is a brilliant document. And if schools really immerse themselves in the essence of what is required in that strong foundations philosophy, then they won't go far wrong. It's making certain children actually get to year 3 able to access the Key Stage 2 curriculum because they've had a damn good Key Stage 1 grounding in basic skills in handwriting, in finger spacing, in spelling, in communication and language, in doing purposeful activities, in continuous provision that are meaningful and support their learning, so that in year one, and that's what, of course, Bold Beginning said 10 years ago, so that in year one, they can they embed and continue with that development, get strong phonics outcomes, strong early reading outcomes. And if schools are in a position where by the time they get to year 3, children have had that rigor, enjoyably so, I hope, and can access the Key Stage 2 curriculum, then you won't go far wrong on this framework, particularly for those children who have made accelerated progress, who are the disadvantaged pupil premium, etc. There you are.
Yeah. I'm just interested, like, with the new framework now, where do you think leaders will most likely get caught out if they don't pay attention now? We've got a whole term, really. I mean, they have said that they will start with those people who volunteer.
Okay.
Brave people who volunteer. Well done for those people. But if they run out of volunteers, then they will start doing the schedule, which is interesting. I'm hoping there's enough volunteers, because I was Ofsteded just before Christmas on the 13th of December once, which is not the best for primary schools when everybody's so worn out. Where do you think people are going to fall down? Those leaders are going to fall down. What's the most if they don't start now?
Firstly, I've made reference to one already. If you've got a policy, make certain that it's actually in action.
Yeah.
So inevitably, when we're looking at achievement of disadvantaged pupils, we're going to be looking at pupil premium strategy. Make certain that all staff are actually buying into that. They know what the strategy says and they're implementing it in their classroom. No point just sitting it on the website, nobody ever reading it. I would also say that if you've identified priorities in your analysis, going through all of these sections of the framework, and I hope schools will have been doing that in the summer, because we could have second guessed that the ultimate framework was virtually what it is, then you'll know and have some really good, I call them learning improvement targets that you're working towards. And once again, there's no point in having a learning improvement plan if you're not working to it. And the staff haven't got ownership of it. So that's the second point. Mentioned, possibly haven't given it the emphasis I should have done so far, but reading and fluency. Children have got to have those reading skills so they can access the curriculum. And if you're inspected and children aren't where they should be with their reading and haven't got that reading confidence, I'd be asking the questions why. So I think that's really important as well.
What have you seen then, Trevor, on that? Because you and I are in quite a lot of schools. I'm just interested recently. What have you seen that's best practice that you would say, yeah, that was good, really good practice in those areas that you've just spoken about?
I think a number of things I see that have a big impact in early years, which aren't used sufficiently enough, are dictation. And I think that's a really powerful tool to support writing and indeed to support early reading as well.
Yeah.
And I don't see enough of that. And it's very clearly there in the national curriculum. And I think that I don't see what I would call enough really good clarity of support for early reading for individual children groups. I think we need to try and hear children read every day if we can. I know that's difficult, but I do think, and encourage that reading at home and getting that dialogue with parents. And that partnership with parents and families is absolutely key to this framework as well. They're part of this dialogue.
Yeah, I mean, there's a big chats in the press at the moment, isn't it, about how much of a say parents have had around the changes in even the names of things, and how they've produced the information about parents but haven't produced the feedback from the profession. So there's a big hoo-ha about that. But I think it's vitally important. They're the first educators of the children, so that we need to work in harmony with them. They're going to be your litmus test. Even your tough ones are going to be your litmus test of how you're doing, aren't they?
And that brokering that really strong partnership with parents, particularly your SEND parents, and I know SEND is a huge issue. We haven't even mentioned EHC plans, but when we look at the SEND issue in schools, that is increasing.
Yeah.
We've got a whole range of reasons why, which we won't go into today, but brokering and building that strong partnership with parents is essential. And incidentally, there were a couple of inspections last term, trial inspections, which I got feedback from where inspectors spoke to the parents of SEND children as part of the inspection process, and quite rightly so.
Yeah.
So I think that that partnership is an important one. And incidentally, there's a couple of things that do come out of the framework, which I think are very helpful for leaders to acknowledge. The first one is that strong emphasis on partnerships. I think that's really, really important. And to get exceptional, they keep using the word transformational. So if you're an outstanding school and you want to get exceptional for the curriculum, I guess your curriculum needs to be transformational. Transformational for those pupil premium, SEND, looked after. What are you doing for those children within the curriculum that is transformational for them and transformational for all pupils across the curriculum, really? So that's a word that is used within the exceptional. So I think for some of the outstanding schools currently, to get exceptional, it's going to be a challenge, because for all of us, that's what you've got to be looking at.
And we keep banging on, don't we, in our heads briefing around books. Do you want to touch on how important books are and what the children are actually producing as evidence-based?
I always say when I go into a classroom, I can triangulate teaching and learning quite quickly by looking at the environment.
Yeah.
But first of all, looking at the ethos. So what's the ethos of learning like in the classroom? Are children engaged? Are they on task? Are they working collaboratively if the task is a collaborative one? Are they capable of working independently? Is there a purposeful learning atmosphere? Are the activities purposeful? If the teacher's talking to the children, are they questioning them incisively, pitching questions appropriately, dependent on the ability of the children and the challenge required? Then I'd look at the environment. I think it's important the environment is reflective of positive learning atmosphere. I do like to see good working walls. Maybe I'm old-fashioned, but good working walls for English and maths, and good quality celebration of work, where appropriate, phonics cues and things on the walls, etc., number cues, and good organisation for learning, easy access to resources. Tells me a lot about the teaching. And then, of course, it's the books. And so many teachers don't realise that those books are their evidence, a portfolio of their evidence over time. And you can look through books and rapidly see, A, what the children have been learning, whether they've been challenged, whether they've got appropriate feedback, whether they've contributed towards that feedback. You can gain so many messages from those books. Quality of presentation, I'm big on that. And if you go into the strong foundations document, there was a real emphasis in early years on forming the right habits for letter and number formation, finger spacing, handwriting, early writing and handwriting, and vocabulary, and all of those things being well established and embedded in those early years in school, so that when I'm looking in the books, I see a reflection of this. And I'd love to see. So had said to me, what would you expect to see by year 3? Well, for English example, I would hope to see a well-crafted paragraph from a child entering year 3. They say just a well-crafted paragraph. I say, well, if they can write a well-crafted paragraph, they can write 2 well-crafted paragraphs. But that well-crafted paragraph has got to be well-constructed, good vocabulary, good spelling, finger spacing, handwriting, punctuation appropriate to the end of year 2, far more important than a couple of pages of gobbledygook or poorly formed writing that has no structure and substance. And you can reflect those similar principles in the maths and the number work, etc., so that they leave year 2 confident in number bonds up to 50. They know the 2, 5, and 10 times table. I say fingertip quick. It's really important that they've got those skills. I keep coming back to those, but if leaders want to get it right, they've got to get it right so that those children have got those foundational skills in Key Stage 1 so that they can actually start to apply and access the curriculum effectively in Key Stage 2. So that's what I think leaders need to be establishing and achieving.
Brilliant. Thank you for that.
So we've been asked a question via LinkedIn. So Ian, one of our listeners, has said, I'd be intrigued to hear your thoughts on when do you know it's the right time to move on from a school or maybe the job as a whole. So, Jacqui, what about you? What are your thoughts on this?
I've got a brilliant thing that I work with. Anybody who knows, has worked in Birmingham, will know this chap that I worked with. I used to go and hear him speak quite a lot, and he used to turn up, usually looking quite dishevelled and with acetates, and throw them down on the front desk, and then choose one and then talk. And I tell you what, you did not turn your attention away from what he was saying. It was absolutely brilliant. I was lucky enough to work with him about more, in fact, 15, 20 years ago. And he gave me one piece of advice. And he said, know when to leave. And his litmus test was, have a think about if you want to hit somebody. That's what he said to me. I went to leave because I didn't, and I hit somebody. I'm not advocating hitting somebody, but it was always in the back of my mind. Am I getting to the point where I'm getting so frustrated with where I am? And it was usually with people that were leading me. And that was my litmus test. I did 4 years in pretty much every job. I think I stayed a bit too long in exec headship. That was the one that I stayed 6 or 7 years in. And I think I should have moved after 4 years, really, and moved on. But I would only move on when I didn't have that vision, the same vision as the people who were leading me. And that, I think, is your litmus test, not the hitting person. What about you, Trevor?
I was in a school in Northamptonshire 2 days ago,
Right.
and it was a village school, and the head has had a successful Ofsted last year. It was good Ofsted, and the school, I think, is thriving. They've got increased numbers coming in. She's very outgoing. She's been there as a head for about 6 years, but it has continued to develop over that time. She applied for another headship of a larger school a couple of years ago and didn't get it. And she's asked my advice this week, and my advice for her: don't move, because she was doing such a cracking job there and she was getting so much fulfillment from it. And in our discussions, there was lots more she still wanted to do. And I think you need to think about your quality of life. And I
Yeah,
think you need to think
definitely.
about your own vision for what you want to achieve. And I don't think she was particularly matched for the school she applied for. I had to do a reference for her. I think
Mm.
she was matched to that environment that she was in and doing a cracking job there. And I think that I advised her just to sit tight and enjoy the ride.
Mm.
And I wouldn't say that necessarily to all heads in different circumstances, because all circumstances are different. But I think I moved mostly in my career when I was at my happiest.
Really? You moved when yeah.
So that
You see, I
contradicts
think
that in
that's
a
where I
way,
went
doesn't it?
wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. I went wrong that way because I always moved when I wasn't at my happiest. And I think that was the wrong thing to do. But I also used to move when I thought, am I leaving the school in a better place than when I arrived?
Yeah.
If I'd done my job, if I'd sorted out what I needed to sort
Yeah.
out and the children were getting the good quality of education, then I needed to move. But
Yeah.
that's really interesting that you're completely opposite to me, that I always moved when I was fed
I
up
think
and you
it's worth
moved when you
saying
were
as well to
happier.
both of you. I mean, it was fabulous working with Jane as well as a head. I mean, when you work with high quality head teachers, you get so much bounce back.
Yeah.
But I did 28 years as a primary head, which
Mm.
is a long time in different schools. And I loved the job. And I still think it's a fabulous job. And I just wish, in a sense, I was starting my headship career again. But I do realise and empathise, and I'm certain we'll be getting loads of feedback on you don't realise the pressures these days of increased special needs and everything. And I do know that. And these are stormy waters that we're going through in terms of
Yeah.
support for special needs. But it's a great job. And I would, I always gave the job my all. And I think if you really love your job and engage with it, there's no better job than being a head teacher or a senior leader in the school.
Mm.
That's my
Yeah,
thoughts.
I totally agree. It is the best job in the world. It is
Yeah.
absolutely the best job in the world. And being a head of a small school, I was at my happiest,
Yes.
being at the center of that community and knowing that I was making a difference was
Yeah.
the best job in the world. It really was. What about
Yeah.
you, Jane?
I think it really depended on the role. I think my substantive headship, I think I stayed too long, but that was COVID that stopped that because it got to the point where I couldn't do any more. I'd taken the school as far as I could. It was in a much better place than when I took it over. And the thought of having to repeat a year, that boredom got me. And I think that was when the other opportunities came in. But then on the flip side, going in as an exec head, supporting new principals with vulnerable schools, turning them around pretty quickly, I was then sort of taken out and put in other vulnerable schools, and I wasn't ready to go, but I was ready to. I didn't want to go, but the school no longer needed me. I used to call it the Nanny McPhee effect. When you don't want me, you need me, and when you do want me, you don't need me, because that's what it was like. But yeah, I think a bit like you, when I get bored very easily. I like to move every 3 or 4 years. And when it gets to the point where people above me really irritate me, where I could carry on what that gentleman told you, that is the time to move on. I think when you lose that job satisfaction, I think it's a mixture of both of yours, really. Yeah.
Can I add a point which I wanted to make earlier, going back to discussions about framework, actually, Jacqui and Jane? Only a brief one. I didn't really, or we haven't really mentioned curriculum too much. And I was expecting the national curriculum to change. And I was saying in some of our briefings, weren't I, Jacqui, a year ago? But quite clearly, I think it's a long way off. I think the DfE and the government of Ofsted feel that the current national curriculum is fit for purpose. And I thoroughly agree. And I think where it isn't, it's where schools aren't using it properly. And I think there's a lot of capacity within that national curriculum and in the non-statutory to really give children a fantastic learning experience in the school. I think a lot of schools centralise and focus in on the same things without trying to be imaginative, and they don't use their local area and local context so much to support their thematic work. I mean, I was in a school the other day in Warwick where they were doing the Great Fire of London. I said, why don't you do the Great Fire of Warwick? Which was just as important and significant in its own way. Yeah. So it's about using the local context and making the curriculum rich and exciting, particularly by the time the children really can access it thoroughly in Key Stage 2. And that brings me back. I do think we could take a bit of fluff out of Key Stage 1. I do feel there's a lot of time where children could be really engaged and enjoying their learning in Key Stage 1, when actually the curriculum doesn't really support that.
Thank you.
So what's in the news? So again, with the Ofsted framework being released, reactions have been mixed. So you've got the NGA says that's more transparency is welcome. But yet many unions are still warning about that extra pressure, which we have touched on earlier in our conversation. And some leaders are still worried about the workload and about parental perception of a report card with the multiple areas.
I think the issue I have, and I've always had, and I had really good experiences with Ofsted inspectors. I have to say, I had very good experiences. I used to bounce off my Ofsted inspectors, and I used to get a lot out of the inspection schedule, which I always presumed that was everybody else's experiences. And having worked in schools across the country recently, in the last couple of years, I think that the pressures have come when you have different personalities, I feel, inspecting schools, where they have a different idea how they're interpreting that framework. And I'm hoping that coming with this more clarity of inspection, we are going to get more clarity of the inspection interpretation for different personalities that we get inspecting our schools. That's what I would hope. But Trevor, how do you think leaders can manage this kind of narrative moving forward to communicate it to staff and parents and governors if their report card isn't all green?
Well, hopefully it won't be red.
Yep.
So Ofsted have indicated that most schools will fall into those middle three areas: attention needed, expected standard, or strong standard. Now, if you've got several attention needed, I don't think that phraseology is the end of the world, do you? I think you can say, well, we're nearly there. I personally think it sounds better than it requires improvement.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think it's a softer narrative, really. But hopefully we've got time as heads and leaders to actually go through this framework and make certain that we're not attention needed. This framework, this toolkit could not be more helpful in supporting schools in achieving that. But I speak as a leader now, got to be careful what I say, but I personally feel that one of the weaknesses I see from heads, they don't delegate enough.
Yeah.
And if somebody isn't doing something well, they try to do it themselves and take even more pressure on themselves. In any good leadership structure, you have to have responsibilities which are equable with status, experience, and grade. And if you make certain that there's no inequalities and that your ECT and ECTs plus one are not working 56, 70 hours a week and you've got a UPR 3 going home at 3:15, if you can avoid that and get that good balance so that the workload is shared, I think you have a successful school. And that's down to good leadership and articulating that to staff. If teachers are working to teacher standards and doing their job well and the school works collaboratively, I think you can share the load.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that follows on really nicely, Trevor, to in my school bag. I mean, we always like to give some practical takeaways, and I think that would be really good to have in school bags this week, is to use your idea of how you work collaboratively with your team to create a visual space where you're looking at that framework and seeing where that
Absolutely.
evidence is. And that could work really well with the delegation. You cannot do this as a leader on your own. You have to work collaboratively.
I always try to empower and value my staff. And and if they feel empowered and valued and they're strong professionals, then you're going to get it back in return, aren't you?
Definitely.
Yeah.
What about yours, Jane? What would be your practical takeaway?
Preparation, I think, is absolute key. I think I got this from Trevor, actually. What to do when Ofsted calls, and have it very clearly set out what your secretary does, what they say, what they don't say, what your deputy does, what your assistant head does, who they contact while you're on that phone. So it's very clearly, and it's just on one side of A4 and it's stuck in people's offices so they know exactly what to do when that phone call comes through and how and what is going to be communicated. Have those emails ready to go to parents, to governors, to staff about what the next steps are. So you're not panicking in between your 90-minute call and sort of running around. So preparation really around that communication.
I'm a great advocate of having a self-evaluation form. I know technically it's not statutory anymore, but if Ofsted rock up, they'll say, how do you self-evaluate?
Yeah.
How do you know where you are? And so I've actually produced a self-evaluation form in the context of the new framework this week. And we can look at how we can get that out to schools in some form, can't we, at some point, Jacqui? Jane?
Yeah, we definitely can. We can put a link to us through our notes, and then we can talk about that, how we can get those sorts of informations out. Because I know, Trevor, you're really good at providing solutions rather than problems for heads. So yeah. Definitely.
Happy to do that. I've always tried to be as supportive for leaders as I can and give advice. But my advice is to, in summing up really, is to, and I'll endeavour to do it in a minute, I promise, is first of all, familiarise yourself with that new framework and get your staff really involved with it as well by allocate a training day and really make one of the tasks to identify inclusion in all of the 8 areas, and they'll find it, believe me.
Yeah.
And also to perhaps try and judge that against an old anonymized inspection report, which is a really good task to do to make the judgments. So familiarizing yourself with that. Strong Foundations is the document that schools should really be engaging with, and Key Stage 1 leaders and EYFS leaders should be all over that because it's phenomenally powerful. I haven't even mentioned the writing strategy, which came out just before the summer holidays, which is equally important. And I know schools need to be thinking about what they're going to be doing in year 1 and year 2 of the implementation of the national writing strategy, because that's, is key to success for those children in school. And yes, think about your school self-evaluation against that framework. It's there, the criteria are in it, and just remember, inclusion goes through that framework like print through Brighton Rock.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you, Trevor.
Pleasure.
Thank you for your insights today, Trevor. It's been invaluable. And we'll put a link to the full Ofsted framework in the show notes. We'll also put a link to how they can get in touch with her for further resources if any schools want that. Leadership is hard, but you don't have to do it alone. We're with you. Reach out and set boundaries and breathe. Please follow us and like us and leave us a review if you can.
Hey, and if this episode has helped, please share it with a colleague. And as Jacqui said, please follow us on Spotify. We're now on Instagram. Yay. And Apple
we love that,
Podcasts.
don't we, Jane? We love our Instagram.
For more conversations about what it really means to be the head. So thank you so much for joining us on Being the Head. And so we see you, we stand with you, and we'll see you next time.